Welcome to Module 11, Wireless Network Security of Network Security Fundamentals series. By the end of this module, you should be able to describe the different types of wireless network attacks, list the vulnerabilities of a VLAN security, and explain the solutions for securing a wireless network. We will first kick out Bluetooth, NFC, and RFIS out of the way, and then we're going to shift our focus to wireless local area network attacks that can happen based on the inherent vulnerabilities, and we're going to discuss the ways to secure those. So Bluetooth is a wireless technology that uses short-range radio frequency, and therefore it provides rapid device pairing and connectivities. When we are talking about Bluetooth technology, regardless of the version of the technology, whether that's version 4, version 5, any of those versions, you're going to need to have devices in a very close proximity because the power provided by Bluetooth technology is not high enough to connect the devices in long distances. So Bluetooth is a PAN technology, which is designed for communications over very short distances. The primary type of Bluetooth network technology is what we call a piconet, right? And piconet, which can be anywhere from 2 to 8 hosts, the Bluetooth devices get connected when they are within each other range, and one of the devices is going to take control over the wireless traffic, while every other device is going to be a follower or a slave to that master or a leader. So let's take a look at this slide where we can see examples. Like we have a follower over here, as you can see. In this case, we call it an active follower, because it's communicating with the leader or the master continuously. And we may have bunch of parked followers, which are the devices that are connected, but they're not actively communicating. Also, you can have multiple active followers communicating with the same type of leader or same leader at the same time. The possible attacks on Bluetooth are not really that huge of a deal when it comes to enterprise security. But for a PAN network, you have to be aware and be able to stop them accordingly. We do have the bluejacking, which is an attack that sends unsolicited messages to Bluetooth-enabled devices, usually text messages, images, or sounds without the receiver actually is asking for them. Note that in that case, the attacker can offload any kind of hidden code or payload through sending those images. Like the images could be a Trojan to bring in a malware or something. We also have the bluejacking, which is basically more annoying than being harmful, because in bluejacking, you basically just steal the communication on the Bluetooth and you're not offloading anything. We do have blue snarfing, which is an attack that accesses unauthorized information from a wireless device through Bluetooth connection. In this type of attack, the attacker can copy information off of the device without owner's knowledge. So without the owner of the phone or device even knowing that this is happening, the files can be transferred out of their devices. And as you can notice, it's a very simple way to fight these off, and that's through having the proper configuration in place. So setting up your device properly can help you avoiding any kind of Bluetooth attacks on your device. So the recommendation is try to keep your Bluetooth off as much as possible. If you need to keep your Bluetooth on with the communication that these days most of us are in need of, like headset communication or car communication, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, and all of those. If we need to have those, we have to make sure our Bluetooth configuration is set up properly and we are using the secure protocol. At least use the PIN for pairing rather than just having the pairing without any kind of PIN or authentication. So near-field communication, or NFC, is a set of a standard used to establish communication between devices also in a very close proximity. This one is even closer than um, Bluetooth, right? Once the devices are brought into super close proximity, for example, about 4 centimeters of each other, or even tap to each other, a two-way communication is established, and the devices using NFC can be active or passive. A passive NFC device, such as an NFC tag, contains information that other device can read. The tag does not read or receive any information. Active NFC devices can read information as well as transmitting the data. So some examples of usage of NFC are like for entertainment. The NFC devices can be used as a ticket to a stadium or concert, right? For purchasing food, beverage, downloading upcoming events by tapping to a smart poster or anything like that. They can be used in offices, right? An NFC-enabled device can be used to enter an office. Retail stores can use those, like coupons or customer reward cards can be provided by tapping to the point of sale or POS terminal. And transportation these days, especially in Bay Area, they're being used very often, like on a bus or a train. The NFC can be used to quickly pass through turnstiles and receive updated schedules by tapping the device on a kiosk or anything in that realm, right? So there are a lot of uses for NFC devices. Um, Also, you can use them in the contactless payment systems, like your Apple Watch, like your Garmin watch, your iPhone, your Android phone. You can pay with those when you go to the shop and you just tap the POS or point of sales device in order to pay what you owe the merchant. You basically are using the NFC technology. NFC technology can be super duper vulnerable at the same time that it can be protected with the current and accurate configurations. Some of the vulnerabilities which are inherent when it comes to NFC are like eavesdropping, right? So an unencrypted NFC communication between the device and a terminal can be intercepted and viewed and later be abused, right? So in defense, because an attacker must be extremely close to the pickup point for the signal, users should remain aware of their surroundings while making a payment. So you don't want to let any other device be close by the point of sale device when you're tapping it, right? Because eavesdropping can happen. Also, another vulnerability associated with NFC is data theft, right? Attackers can basically bump a portable reader to a user's smartphone in a crowd, maybe in a train or in a BART or anywhere, to make an NFC connection and then steal payment information stored on the phone, which can then be abused. This can also be prevented by turning off NFC while in large crowds. Like before you go on that trip, turn off your NFC, make sure nobody is, touching that while it's in your back pocket or it's in your backpack, right? Also, man-in-the-middle attack can happen in which an attacker can intercept the NFC communication between devices and forge a fictitious response and take advantage of that. In defense, devices can be configured in pairing so one device can only send while the other can only receive. Other risk is device theft. Device theft is not uncommon these days, right? Like the theft of a smartphone could allow an attacker to use the phone for the purchase. In defense, the smartphones should be protected with passwords or strong pins. So as you have noticed, most of the automatic payment systems like Apple Pay or Google Pay and all of those, um, they need you to enter a PIN before they actually activate the NFC for the payment. And this is the defense over there. So another wireless technology, which is really similar to NFC, is radio frequency identification, or RFID. And of course, it's also vulnerable towards some attacks, right? So the RFID is commonly used to transmit information between employee identification badges, inventory tags, book labels, and other paper-based tags that can be detected by a proximity reader. Note that again, even in RFID attacks, you have to be in the close proximity, right? Most RFID tags are passive, meaning they do not have their own power supply. So that's just a chip with the information. No battery, no nothing, no power. So because they do not require a power supply, they can be super small. They can be actually integrated into a very small patch that you can even attach on the back of your nail or anything like that. So RFID tags are susceptible to many different attacks, some of which are unauthorized tag access, right? A raw RFID reader can determine the inventory on a store shelf to track the sales of a specific item and then abuse that information, right? So implications of this type of attack is sales information could be used by a rival product manufacturer to negotiate additional shelf space or better product placement or anything in that realm. The other risk is the fake tags, right? Authentic RFID tags are replaced with fake tags that contain fictitious data about the products that are not in the inventory. And fake tags can undermine the integrity of the store's inventory system by showing data for items that do not actually exist. Also, eavesdropping can happen in which unauthorized users could listen in on communications between RFID tags and the readers, and confidential data such as a politician's purchase of, let's say, antidepressant could be sold to a rival candidate in a smear campaign against that person. So you can go even more creative and come up with any other implication of the attacks that can happen in the RFID attacks. So with those smaller networks putting aside, so everything that we talked about so far is about close proximity. Now we can talk about wireless local area network LANs or wireless LAN attacks, right? So wired local area network that you have been looking at before is designed to replace or supplement with the wired network. So the wireless LAN basically is the same as a LAN, but instead of the cables, you are using wireless technology. It's important to understand and know what is the history of the IEEE wireless LANs, hardware necessary for a wireless network, different type of wireless LAN attacks directed at enterprise and home users. All in all together, the wireless LAN versions are defined by IEEE standards, right? Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineering as the most influential organization for computer networking and wireless communication, and they define the standards. So their standards are defined to make sure different devices can work with each other, can pair with each other without any kind of problem, since both are following the same standard. I'm not going to go deep into the history and all that. Let's just look at what standards are included. So we started with 802.11a, B, G, and AC, AX, and that's what you call wireless 6 these days, right? So there is a consumer-friendly name for all of these, like 802.11a doesn't have no designation. So basically that's what it is. It was the first one. But starting B, they started counting them with wireless codes and numbers that sequentially adds up. For example, 802.11b is called Wi-Fi 1. G is called Wi-Fi 2, and it's called Wi-Fi 3, 4, and so on and so forth, till we get down to X, and AX is called Wi-Fi 6. So basically, in order to understand better, what we have to do is we have to get this one. I'm just changing this for the sake of understanding the notations, right? If I substitute this with and the order, so instead of starting with A, if I start with B, then I have B, A, G, N, A, C, and AX, which from the top here, this is wireless 1, this is wireless 2, this one is going to be wireless 3, wireless 4, wireless 5 or Wi-Fi 5, right? And then I have Wi-Fi 6. So that's just a switch in DNA. And as I said, 802.11 does not have no designation itself. That was established in 1997. That was ratified on that date, and Wi-Fi 6 was ratified in 2019. 802.11 and 802.11b, basically Wi-Fi 1, and also Wi-Fi 3, they are only operating on 2.4 gigahertz, while Wi-Fi 2 is operating at 5 gigahertz, and also Wi-Fi 5 is at 5 gigahertz. And then you have Wi-Fi 4 and 6, which can operate at both 2.4 and 5. And actually, when it comes to Wi-Fi 6, we do have the ranges from 1 to 6 gigahertz also available. So as you can see, as these developed, more frequencies were assigned to help the speed and all that. So that's basically all about the Wi-Fi standards. What you need to understand more than these names and the information about the technology behind the scene is the concept of how a connection in the wireless network happens and how you can secure it. Remember, you always can have access to a table like this and have all the information about the dates, the frequencies, the speed, and all that. You can easily find this with a Google search. Of course, if you are planning to take the exam for ompTIA, they want you to memorize these, but when it comes to the real life job market, you can easily search for these things, and the only thing you need to know is the concept behind the scene. So when it comes to wireless LAN hardware, a wireless client network interface card adapter is needed, which is going to perform the functions similar to what a wired adapter does, but basically modulation and demodulation happens to address 802.11 standards. They usually come with an antenna, which sends and receives the signal through airwaves. You need to have an access point to connect to it. So basically, your client comes with the wireless network card or the wireless NIC, but then the access point is needed to connect to the client, right? Is centrally located connection device that can send and receive wireless signals. Primarily consists of an antenna. Actually, the newer access points have multiple antennas, especially if they're working on different frequencies at the same time. Of course, they need different antennas to resonate those frequencies, right? And they are basically a transceiver, meaning they can transmit and receive at the same time, hence called a transceiver. In network, we call them APs, standing for access point, and the functionality is to act as a base station for the network and be a bridge between the wireless and wired network. If you notice, all the access points you have around, they are connected to the actual network through a cable. So they create their own smaller wireless network around, while directly themselves are connected to the cable network, the wired network, which at the end of the day goes out. If you look at your home, you have a router, right? A wireless router that is actually a cable modem plus a wireless router. So Comcast cable or any provider that you have, the cable comes in, goes to the router, connects to that cable modem part of the router where the signal is being demodulated, and then you have the internal connection to the cable modem, right? And your wireless router basically is internally connected because these devices are two in one for say cable modem and wireless router in the same device. But if you want to break them down from the cable modem, now you need to run an RJ45 connectivity into the router if you have the wireless router and the cable modem separated, which was the case, I believe, in the past. Even now, when people are not happy with the wireless routers that they get from the internet providers because the speed is not providing their need, that is not satisfying their need, what they do is they connect a more advanced wireless access point or wireless router through a cable to this wireless router of the internet service provider so that they can have their own speed that they are looking for. So a wireless LAN using an access point is operating in infrastructure mode. Networks that are not using an access point, they actually operate in ad hoc mode. And this is simple to understand. In an ad hoc mode, you usually have just two devices that communicate between themselves, and they don't communicate with any other device. A good example of this is these newer action cameras that you connect to, like GoPro Hero 11 or Insta360 X3 for say. When you want to connect to the device in order to read your images off the device or change some configurations on the device, what you do is you actually connect your phone into the wireless card of the device, which turns into the access point at that point for you, and you create an ad hoc communication because Bluetooth and other technologies are not providing enough bandwidth for that type of image transfer that you need between the action camera on your phone. You're using a wireless ad hoc connectivity between these two devices. If you think about this case, it's only your phone and your camera, nothing else is in between. So that's when we have an ad hoc mode. So the Wi-Fi Alliance has created a similar technical specification called Wi-Fi Direct, which two laptops can connect and go through that. So types of access points include fat versus thin access points, controller versus a standalone, and captive portal access point, with which each one comes with its own characteristics. We don't want to dive deep into the access point types and all that in this one because that goes back to network fundamentals series, and here we want to be more focused on the security, so we just renamed them for you. If you're interested in learning more about those, go and watch the video I have posted about wireless network fundamentals, which you can learn more in detail about every single one of those. So wireless LAN enterprise attacks, let's talk about those, right? In a network, a well-defined boundary protects data and resources, which we call it a perimeter or a hard edge, right? This perimeter is where you want to keep anyone who is unauthorized to access your network outside. You don't want to let anybody to come in, right? There are two types of hard edges, a network hard edge, and the second one is made up of the walls and buildings that house the enterprise. So basically you have the physical boundary, and then you have the network boundary. The introduction of wireless LANs in enterprises has changed these hard edges into blurred edges, because think about it, when you go to the parking lot of this Starbucks, you're not within the physical boundaries of the Starbucks, but still you can connect to the access point of the Starbucks. And right now, if you search your phone for access points, you can find access points of your neighbors and everybody that you definitely are not within their physical boundaries, within the walls of that boundary, let's say, entity, but you can have access to the wireless access points they have. And that's why we call them, okay, these are not hard edges anymore. These are now blurred edges, right? There are several types of wireless attacks that can be directed at the enterprises. Those attacks will be covered in the rest of this discussion. But before we go forward, just think for a moment and think how much control you have on a physical network, on a network that is connecting everything with cables. The medium is cable. You can simply just lock the door and nobody's going to have access to the cable. Nobody's going to have access to the communication which goes over those cables, right? And if you just are not connected to the internet, if it's a home that has its own server, a couple of laptops that are connecting to the server without any external communication, it's impossible to hack to it. It's impossible to break into the security unless somebody literally breaks the door, excuse me, and comes in. But as soon as you introduce the wireless access point to connect these devices, now anyone who is within the range of the wireless connectivity can actually become an attacker. And very soon we're going to discuss one of the countermeasures we have is to make sure our wireless access point is set up so central into the building that it does at the edges. When it arrives at the walls, it's actually as its least powerful gain, and anyone outside the walls cannot really get a good wireless signal. So row access points are unauthorized access points that allow an attacker to bypass network security configurations, because those are not visible by the enterprise security. Those are not managed by the enterprise security, right? Sometimes they're set up by an insider, like an employee. Think about the employee who wants to have internet on their tablet, but there is no policy in the company that allows them to connect with their tablet, right? Instead, what they do is they buy this a small, very small access point, they bring it in, they disconnect the cable from their desktop computer, and they connect it to the wireless access point. Now there is a wireless access to the network through that connectivity, which is not controlled and monitored by the enterprise. In that case, this is what we call a row access point. Also may be set up behind the firewall, operating by itself without no monitoring, and therefore opening the doors to the attackers, right? The other thing is evil twins can be in place, right? Evil twin is an access point set up by an attacker. An example is the Pineapple Wireless evil twin device that can be easily purchased off of internet and be used as an evil twin to any access point. What it does is it attempts to mimic that it is an authorized access point, not a row one, and then entice users to connect to it because it looks like one of the legit access points, and therefore the attacker can have access to the transmission that goes through the evil twin. If you're more interested in learning about this, just look up Pineapple Wi-Fi, and that device is the device that attackers actually use for the row attack. A good example here, as you can see in this slide, is one of the employees have attached this row access point to the network. So the cable has got disconnected from a computer and connected there. And now you have legit access points here and here. And then this guy in the middle is the row that can open up a backdoor. And as you can see, an attacker laptop can gain access to it. Also, the attacker can drop an evil twin that tells this guy, hey, I'm the access point, come connect to me. Usually they do this with adjusting the gain of antenna way above the actual access points. So the device which wants to get connected always prefers the higher gain, which means better wireless connectivity. And with going that way, now the devices are connected to the evil twin, which is controlled by the attacker. So intercepting wireless data is way easier than wired data. It's obvious, right? An attacker can pick up the radio frequency signal from an open or misconfigured access point easily. Using a wireless LAN to read this data could yield significant information to an attacker regarding the wired enterprise network. can be used as a recon step, or can actually help the attacker conduct the entire attack. They can laterally move in and gain access to the wired network, which usually is the more secure part of the network, and compromise that. Also, an attacker can apply a denial of service attack or DOS attack through RF jamming or radio frequency jamming, which occurs when attackers use intentional RF interference to flood the RF spectrum with enough interference to prevent a device from communicating with the access point. Law enforcement units, especially tactical units, use RF jammers a lot. They have portable RF jammers that can jam all type of radio frequency around, even making rendering cell phones useless, right? Spoofing also occurs when attackers craft a fictitious frame that pretends to come from a trusted client when it actually comes from the attacker, because now we don't have that physical trust, right? Like in a wired network, someone needs to physically connect their device in order to fool other devices. But in this case, it's just spoofing the MAC address or IP address, which the latter is easier, right? Spoofing the IP address of a device and pretend that they are a different device. So manipulating duration field values occurs when attackers send the frame, but the duration field set to high value so that it can circulate a lot, and it prevents other devices from transmitting for that period of time that they are circulating, and therefore basically the network is rendered useless at that point. So we do have wireless consumer attacks. Like most home users fail to configure any security on their networks. If you look for wireless access points around yourself right now, you're going to find, if you're in a crowded area, like in a city like San Francisco, you're going to find many of those. And some of them actually come with all the default configurations. Like if you're on Comcast, the admin username is always admin and the password is password, right? So it's super easy. If nobody has changed it, it's super easy to go ahead and log in as the admin and then change it to your liking and conduct the attacks, right? Which in that case, you can steal data, you can read their wireless transmission, look into their packets, see their passwords, even inject your own malwares or download any kind of harmful content to their systems, or just use their access point, their internet access as a foothold for your next attack on another entity, which in that case, if it gets traced back, it's going to come to that neighbor rather than coming to the actual attacker, right? Let's stop here for a moment and do a quick knowledge review. So which wireless technology establishes two-way communication when two devices are brought within 4 centimeters of each other or tapped together, and it is often used in contactless payment systems? So the survey says B, NFC. So now let's talk more of the vulnerabilities of wireless LAN security. The original 802.11, note that there is no letter at the end, right? The committee recognized wireless transmission could be vulnerable. They implemented several wireless security protections in the standard while leaving others to the wireless LAN vendor's discretion. Several of these protections were vulnerable and actually led to multiple attacks themselves. First, and the least secure, is Wired Equivalent Privacy, or WEP, which is an IEEE 802.11 security protocol designed to ensure that only authorized parties can view transmission. In this, we encrypt the transmission, not the handshake and rest, right? And a secret key is shared between wireless client device and the access point. WEP itself is vulnerable, right? it can only use 64 bits or 128-bit number to encrypt. Initialization vector is only 24 of these bits, meaning that with a normal computer in hand, with a normal laptop in hand, and a good application installed, the security can be broken so easy. The encryption can be broken into very easy. The short length actually makes it easier to break because the number of combination that an attacker needs to use in order to break into the security here are way low. I mean, maybe years ago it was high considering the power of computers, but these days with a mobile phone in hand, like with an iPhone in your hand, you can easily break into, with the power of an iPhone. Let's say, what is the newer chip? I believe that's A16, right? With an A16 chip, you can easily break into this type of security protocol without even getting your device hot. Not even that, right? So WEP violates the cardinal rule of cryptography, which is avoid a detectable pattern, because all the patterns in WEP are detectable. So attackers can see duplications when IVs start repeating, and they're like, oh, okay, this is the initialization vector. This is happening again and again. Okay, so this should be it. And then after that, the wireless access point is doomed. So there is an additional mean of configuration security in wireless LAN, and that is called Wi-Fi protected setup, or WPS. Two common WPS methods include either the pin method, which utilizes a pin printed on a sticker of the wireless router or displayed through a software wizard. Basically, most of these Comcast routers, if you pick it up and look under the router, you're going to see the pin. There is also a push button method that you bring your device close by, you will start connecting, and you have to push that button for security configuration to take place automatically without no need for the pin. I mean, considering that you need to have physical access to push the button, there is a debate over is this secure or not. Because now everyone who has physical access or can gain physical access can connect to the wireless network. But then on the other side of the aisle, the debate is, hey, but they need the physical access, right? How they can gain the physical access. So physical security is protecting us. So design and implementation flaws that come with it include there is no lockout limit for entering the pins. So when you want to connect to a wireless access point through the pins provided by Comcast at the bottom of the router, you can enter those wrong for 2 million times and no lockout happens. So an attacker can actually test multiple possible combinations in order to find a successful logon. And as if you notice, anytime you have an account with any of these good secure entities like your bank account, if you enter your password wrong 3 or 4 times, they're going to lock your account out for a certain period of time, which means if an attacker is trying different possible combinations on your account, then in that case, they only can try 4 before they get locked out. But with the WPS, you don't have no lockout. So you can go till the cows come back home till you find the actual passphrase, right? The last pin character is only a checksum. So for that last pin character, you don't even need to know it because that's just a checksum. The wireless router reports the validity of the first and second halves of the pin separately. That means you can find the first half first while you don't care about the second one. And then after you have the first half, you can go with the second one, which brings your tries down by 2 to the power of 4, which is a good number to bring it down, right? Based on the half, right? Half is half of a byte, which is 8. So wireless access control is intended to limit a user's admission to an access point. One of the means of doing this is to check the MAC address. As you already know, media access control is basically a unique address for your hardware that no other hardware in the world is going to have that. So it's like the fingerprint of the hardware you have. So MAC address filtering is the most common type of wireless access control. It is used by nearly all wireless AP vendors, and it permits or blocks devices based on the MAC address. So you can actually blacklist a device, a physical device, no matter what operating system is on that device, even if they take the device and wipe it out and install a new system, it's a Windows, they install Linux on it, still the MAC address is the same and therefore can easily be blocked. But there are some vulnerabilities also associated with the security control. MAC addresses are initially exchanged in an unencrypted format. So someone picking up that initial exchange of the MAC address on the network, then they can imitate as their own MAC address. And now there are devices out there that you can easily spoof the MAC address on and duplicate the MAC address on. And through a software, you can fool the access point to be that MAC address. This is called MAC address spoofing, right? Also managing a large number of addresses when it comes to a huge enterprise, like let's say the Google Office, right? It's going to be super challenging to manage all of those, especially considering most of those are not following certain pattern unless they're coming from the same vendor. So this is an example of the MAC address filtering list, right? You can filter and say, hey, allow any station or block all the stations and have the list of MAC addresses over here. If you go to your wireless access point at home and go to your dashboard, which basically is through connecting to the portal address of it, most possibly yours is 10.0.0.1 or 192.168.0.0, whichever it is, whatever vendor you have, which they use different type of private IP addresses within the home networks. When you get to that portal, put in username and password, now you can have a list of all the devices connected, right? And the MAC addresses usually is detected and shown in that list, which then you can use for MAC address filtering. So stepping everything up a notch, we come to Wi-Fi protected access, or WPA. So it was introduced by the Wi-Fi Alliance to fit into the existing WEP engine without requiring extensive hardware upgrades or replacements and making it more secure. There are two types of WPA, personal and enterprise. And the WPA comes to address two problems, encryption problem and authentication problem, right? Authentication for WPA personal is accomplished by using a pre-shared key or PSK. In a wireless LAN, a PSK is a secret value that is manually entered on both the access point and each wireless device. So that's when you go to your access point and define your pre-shared key. You just type it in, say, hey, this is the pre-shared key that I want to use, and then use it as the connection password on your devices as well. Devices that have the secret key can automatically be authenticated every time they come to the close proximity of the access point and get connected. Let's stop here and do another knowledge review quickly. So what does the WPA personal protocol use to establish authentication? I think this one is super simple, right? The survey says the answer is pre-shared key. So modern wireless security solutions are much more secure than WEP or WPA, right? Wi-Fi protected access 2 and 3 from the foundation of they actually from the foundation of the problems that we found in WPA and WEP rose to today's wireless security solutions that are way more secure and way more difficult to be broken into. So for WPA2, we are basing it on IEEE 802.11.I standard, If anybody is interested in learning more detail, you can just go to IEEE website and download the 802.11i standard document, which explains WPA2. Like WPA, there are two modes, personal and enterprise. And again, like WPA, we are addressing the problems of encryption and authentication in a more secure way in comparison with WPA. How more secure? First and foremost, the encryption. We're using AES CCMP encryption. The encryption protocol used for WPA2 is the counter mode with cipher block chaining message authentication code protocol. Very, very mouth-filling, right? It specifies the use of CCM with advanced encryption protocol that we discussed before, right? The cipher block chaining message authentication code component of the CCMP provides data integrity and authentication at the same time. Also, WPA introduces the authentication solution, right? Authentication for WPA2 enterprise model, which is called enterprise mode, uses the IEEE 802.1.x standard. This standard provides greater degree of security by implementing port-based authentication. If you remember, port is the address to the application, while IP address is the digital address to the device itself. This standard blocks all traffic on a port-by-port basis until client is authenticated. So even if the client can access the device, still they cannot send and receive traffic to any application till they're fully authenticated. So looking at this one quickly, we do have the authenticator server, and supplicant, right? So step one is supplicant asks to join the network. The authenticator asks supplicant to verify their identity, right? And then the supplicant sends identity to the authenticator. Note that so far, there is no access to anything. They're just going back and forth, right? At this point, the identity is going to be sent to the authentication server to be reviewed. And if the authentication server verifies it back to the authenticator, then supplicant is approved to join the network. So before they go through all of the steps, no access is going to happen. And you can see now we have an authenticator and authentication server to take care of IEEE 802.1x process. So even WPA2, the Wi-Fi Protected Access Protocol 2, uses more protocols to provide security for us. Next one is Extensible Authentication Protocol, EAP, which is a framework for transporting authentication protocols. The EAP defines the message formats and also uses a specific type of packets. Request packet receives the respond packet, confirms with the success packet, or denies with the failure packet. A common EAP protocol that is being used in WPA2 is called Protected EAP or PEAP, which basically just simplifies the process of the authentication we just went through in the last slide by using Microsoft Windows login and passwords. It creates encrypted channel between client and authentication server. So instead of client talking to the authenticator as you had here, then the client and server can basically directly communicate through PEAP. WPA2 is secure. No, it's broken. There are many instances of that to be broken. And for that reason, WPA3 or Wi-Fi Protected Access 3 came to birth. It's the next generation of Wi-Fi protected access. Security improvements are inclusion of simultaneous authentication of equals or SAE, which is designed to increase security at the time of the handshake when keys are being exchanged between the two devices or access point and the device. Also, it supports a longer 192-bit encryption. We already discussed the longer the encryption cipher is, the more difficult it is to be broken. Compare this with the 16 or 64 bits. It's way more complicated here. Consider that with 192 bits, we can have 2 to the power of 192 different combinations. When using open or public Wi-Fi networks, WPA3 applies individual data encryption. So that's one extra layer of encryption. WPA3 has improved interaction capabilities with IoT devices. That's what your devices at home are using. That's what your refrigerator is using. That's what your washing machine is using. So as you can see, the protocols just got more sophisticated to bring higher level of security to WPA3. Other security steps also can be taken to protect the wireless network. These are actually most neglected measures because WPA3 protocol, known as the most secure of all of these, as what everyone is going to enable on their access point, and boom, that's the something which we can actually consider given. But do we care about installation and configuration? Do we care about specialized system communications? Do we care about detecting the row APs and evil twins and removing them? These are the additional wireless security protections that an enterprise puts into consideration and constantly reviews and comes back to. Excuse me. So, important consideration must be taken into account when installing a new wireless LAN for an organization. First and foremost, you want to make sure all areas of building should have adequate wireless coverage. This is more like functionality or functional requirement, right? Every person sitting in that building must have the wireless coverage. All employees must have a reasonable amount of bandwidth. So you have to have access points close enough to the employee so they get enough bandwidth. On top of having the coverage, which means they can connect, they should have enough bandwidth. A minimum amount of wireless signal should be bleed outside the walls of the building. This is where security comes into play, right? If you look at this image here, let me make it a little bit larger. If this is your enterprise, note that the access points are settled so that within the building, everyone has access, right? However, you have a little bit of bleed down here. Like if you continue this gain color patch, you see behind the wall, if somebody stands here, right here where the cursor is, they're going to have access to the wireless access point. So what you want to do is you want to move this a little bit inner, and you're dealing with the problem of these guys over here also need access, but you cannot completely cut the access outside, because if you cut the access outside, that means inner, just right by the walls, you're not going to have enough access. So what we want to make sure is minimize this bleed outside. Usually people don't have the guts to come and just sit next to the wall and use a laptop to hack into your network, but they can easily sit in the parking lot somewhere here close to the wall and do this. So put that into consideration when you're installing your access points. You want to make sure that the minimum amount of bleed is happening, especially where visitors sit, when guests sit, when cars are being parked, where people can easily sit there undetected and open up a laptop, right? A site survey and an in-depth examination and analysis of a wireless site is needed to happen on a regular basis. So you want to have a site survey, know where's your signal stronger, where's your signal weaker, walk outside the walls, make sure you don't have a lot of wireless signal bleeding. There are tools that you can use, like the heat map that we just looked at. There are Wi-Fi analyzers that you can go around the building and see the gains. Also, actually, you have the applications that you can easily install on your phones. Like each phone can these days easily turn into a Wi-Fi analyzer. It's a fun project. Just go ahead and install a Wi-Fi analyzer on your project and walk around the home and see where you can have better signal by moving your access point in comparison with the situation you already have. It's always pays to move the access point around. Also, the channel overlays can show you how the distribution of the channel happens throughout the building. Some access point configuration settings are designed to limit the spread of the wireless signal so that a minimum amount of signal extends past the physical boundaries of the enterprise to be accessible to the outsiders, as we just discussed. Signal strength settings, you can use the access points and adjust, of course, those who can allow you to, because, of course, better access points have these options and functionalities, simpler ones don't. But if your access point allows you, you want to do adjustment of the power level at which the LAN transmits, and reducing the power allows less signal bleed to the outside. Also, you can use a spectrum selection, which is the functionality that some APs provide, and you can adjust the frequency spectrum settings, like the frequency band, which band is that on, what channel are you using, what is the channel width, and all that. Again, limiting the access so that only your own users can take advantage of the wireless access. The other thing that you can look into is the antenna placement and the type of the antenna. Access points should be located near the center of the coverage area so the minimum amount of bleed happens. Access points can be secured high on a wall to reduce the signal obstruction and deter the theft. Like if you have the access points on the ceiling, most possibly you're going to have least amount of obstruction from the tables, sofas, devices, computers, monitors, and all of those in comparison with putting the access point on the floor, right? If possible, the access point and antenna should be positioned so that a minimal amount of signal reaches beyond the security perimeter. As you've noticed, we have discussed this like many times within the last 3 slides. Limit the bleeding. That's the most important thing you want to do, because you want to have the shortest length of a cable hanging out there for people to tap into, and hence tap into your network, right? Also, the other option you have is to use a type of antenna that focuses its signal in a concentrated direction towards authorized users instead of broadcasting it over a wide area, like omnidirection antennas that we usually use. You don't want to have those if your budget allows. The focused direction antennas are usually very much more expensive than the omnidirectionals. Lastly, let's talk a little bit about the specialized system communications technologies that are out there. There are several wireless technologies related to communications for specialized and embedded systems, such as Zigbee. That's actually what Samsung smart home system is using these days. You have the 4G, 5G, the LTEs, different type of wireless cellular networks out there. You have the narrowband IoTs, what is being used again in the smart devices within the home. Cellular IoT baseband also is out there. And the SIM cards of your cell phones. These are all creating wireless communications that when it comes to those, there are different measures to put in place in order to make them secure. However, we're still following the same principles. Some of them may not be applicable, like for a SIM card communication. You basically cannot set a physical boundary because it's going to be everywhere. But then technologies like 5G allow you to secure the communication from the encryption to the data transfer and to the protection of the users. Other thing you want to do is have a plan in place to identify the row access points and evil twins, right? It is important to use the probes, right? Detection requires a special sensor that we call it a wireless probe. So you need to have a central system that reads the information from the probes and raises the alarm for you. And also you need to disperse the probes around the network so they can observe the communication, they can observe the transmission of the data and transmission of the signal so that they can find this kind of row access points or evil twins. There are 4 types of wireless probes that can monitor air waves, okay? And they look into the traffic. We have the wireless device probe, we have the desktop probe, we have the AP probes, and we have a dedicated probe. And they're just categorized based on where they're installed, right? You can have it on the device, you can have it on a desktop, you can have it on the access point, or you can just have a device, which is the dedicated probe that just looks into the traffic. Once a suspicious signal is detected by a wireless probe, the information is sent to the centralized database where the wireless LAN management system software compares it to a list of approved access points. And if that access point is not approved, then it's considered a row, and then it's going to get addressed. So all in all together, the wireless security these days, when it comes to the job of IT administrators or system administrators, is mostly focused on configuration, installation, boundary management, and on the other side of the coin, choosing the right protocol, WPA3, but of course, based on the enterprise needs, and then applying the right configuration on the protocol setup, on the device setup, on the access point setup, and having monitoring devices that can look into the traffic. Let's do a quick knowledge review here. Which of the following is not a packet type used with the extensible authentication protocol? And the survey says acknowledgement. Okay, that pretty much completes everything we wanted to talk about here. Now, in the next lectures, we're going to go deeper into some of these topics. But for now, let's summarize what we discussed. We talked about Bluetooth and the fact that it's a wireless technology using short-range radio frequency transmissions. Near-field communication, or NFC, is a set of a standard primarily for smartphones and smart cards used to communicate with devices in close proximity. A wireless technology similar to NFC is radio frequency identification, or RFID. A wireless local area network, or WLAN, is designed to replace or supplement a wired LAN. The IEEE has developed standards for wireless LANs. Wireless LANs are frequently the target of the attacker for good reason. A row access point is an unauthorized AP that allows an attacker to bypass network security and open the network and its users to attacks. IEEE 802.11 committee implemented several wireless security protections in 802.11 standard. WEP and WPS, however, have significant design and implementation flaws, of course known to the attackers as well. Controlling access to the wireless LAN can be accomplished using MAC filtering on the access point. Wi-Fi protected access WPA and WPA2 have become the foundations of wireless security today. We also talked about the other steps to protect the wireless network, which include detecting row access points, choosing the best type of AP to match the needs of the network, managing APs through wireless LAN controller or WLC, using a captive portal access point power level adjustment configurations, right? And antenna positioning. With that being said, we're going to finish this lecture.